Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be here. Welcome to join. Welcome in joining me in this session today. Um, as Giles alluded to, I am the impact investing leader at Eastwood Investments, which forms part of the Alan Gray Philanthropy Group. I also wear the other hat of being a South African M&E Association board member. Um, and I guess I'm very passionate about M&E capacity building. Um, so today's session is really around, setting the scene as to, why M&E, defining what M&E is and the different forms of M&E, and then getting sort of on with how to better support M&E within your organization, and then closing off with some useful resources and tools you may want to consult in either setting up an M&E function or um, getting access to some free training that's available online through different sources. And also to show you the SAMEA website in case you're interested in becoming a member, and in case you're interested in, I guess, wanting to further your knowledge of M&E and be exposed to other initiatives like the community of practice that SAMEA are running. So just a little bit about myself. As I mentioned, I'm a board member of SAMEA, but I also take part in other international evaluation societies like the American Evaluation Association, as well as Social Value International. In my sort of private capacity, I also do M&E consulting. But in terms of, I guess, facilitating similar sessions, I've done so with Bridge Education Community of Practice, M&E workshop or capacity building series in Cape Town in terms of COPs, as well as with the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs. And if you're interested in connecting, feel free to connect via LinkedIn. But also, it'll be great. I mean, I don't know if you've all met each other before, but if you in the chat can please just say your name, organization, the roles that you occupy, and where you're joining us from in sort of one line. That would be great, so that we all get to know each other as well. So before I begin, I almost want to set the scene as to why M&E. If one thinks about sort of, I guess, the context we're living in, I mean, it's almost oversighted that COVID-19 has changed our world, but we had so many changes in terms of, I guess, how people engage, how governments have sort of changed over the time as well in terms of different administrations. We've had a war in the Ukraine, or that's still ongoing, and many natural disasters as well. We also sort of find ourselves in a sort of economic climate where it's sort of you could say we sort of there's a dooming recession, and what that creates is a knock-on effect in terms of the availability of funding, where foreign aid starts to decline towards sort of its flow into South Africa. What you also find is that there's more of a need to justify why you require funding and what that aid and funding is being used for. You also find that we're sort of in an era of doing work in a more digitized way. I would say that the pandemic and even post-pandemic means that we're sort of operating in a world where um, things happen much faster. You know, a few years ago, we wouldn't be talking about doing virtual evaluations. Now we are. And also that working in an integrated, digitally transformed environment means that we get work done faster. And in terms of accountability, going back to what I was mentioning about aid, with aid sort of in the decline and there being more of a just need to justify how you've sort of accounted for this types of funding received, and from a different point of view, funding being available for experimentation, there's a greater need to sort of I almost want to say demonstrate impact. I also want to say that as much as there's the donor grantee power dynamic as to do I fit someone's, I guess, funding mandate, there's also the other sort of dynamic starting to emerge of grantees saying, I don't fit someone's mandate, I can actually go seek funding somewhere else. It's probably a rare occurrence, but there are those kind of things starting to emerge. And then philosophically, you also start seeing I guess, the emergence of different M&E approaches. So by that, I mean, within the industry that I'm involved in, the impact investing industry, M&E is actually called impact management and measurement. M&E is still the common term that's being used, but they know that there's I almost want to say, slight philosophical difference where um, within the sort of social entrepreneurship, in entrepreneurship and impact investing sector, there's this belief that impact management and measurement, in other words, one is more active in how you conduct your measurement. You actually manage the impact as you implement, and you evaluate as you go along. Versus M&E is kind of seen as a sort of process or function that's associated with longer term grant making processes. So again, going back to the philosophy of all of this is that even though the process of what we do is still called M&E, philosophically, there's this belief that you can, I guess, see impact or calibrate impact much faster to make decisions. Then there's also the, I guess, added pressure of trying to show how you align to SDGs, trying to find that whatever you report on as an organization has some relevance or connection back to an SDG, which somehow improves your potential, I guess, appeal to funders, but also allows you to make more meaning out of the impact that you've created on the ground. Then, from a different perspective, maybe this is a little bit dated, but in terms of trying to see how the work you do aligns to national priorities. So this is just an example of the NDP. So what this really means is that if you're doing M&E within an organization, what you're trying to do is almost explain what do these output indicators, what do these outcomes and so on, what are the things that we measure basically mean in terms of what we're trying to solve for as an organization. So sort of looking at it deeply, I guess the challenges are really around the relevance. Are we sort of relevant in this sort of very volatile time in terms of what we do as organizations? Are we collecting the right information, and what do we do with it? So I know a lot of organizations collect information to report to donors. Sometimes they collect more than what is needed, and then the donor doesn't even look at that information. Or sometimes they just collect enough, and I almost want to say that it's scratching the surface of the type of interesting things that you might want to know about the M&E data. Then there's also the sort of challenge of being flexible and adaptable because things change so rapidly. So how does one make decisions faster? Who's accountable? And at what point does one take that data and say, oh, this is interesting. We need to do something about it. So that sort of brings us sort of in terms of the context setting for today is I just want to say, taking all these things into consideration, why does one really, or how does one really use M&E to fully assist the organization in being flexible in its movements and so on? So looking at M&E differently, um, in an organization, M&E is sometimes seen as a chore, and it's something that it's imposed on you. It's a donor requirement rather than an internal thing that we use to continuously improve and change what we do, but it's a vital function within your organization. So when one wants to define M&E, for those that are new to M&E, it's a continuous management function to assess if progress is made in achieving expected results, to spot bottlenecks in implementation, and to highlight whether there are unintended effects, positive or negative, from an investment plan, program, or project and its activities. So essentially, you're tracking for results, and you're trying to find out whether or not there's any deviation from it. It also relates back to your planning processes within an organization. So, M&E is sort of explained in that one liner, but I think they're two actually distinct functions. So monitoring is a process of periodically collecting data, analyzing and using that information to actively manage performance, maximize positive impacts, and minimize the risk of adverse impacts. So going back to what I was describing earlier on the philosophical debate, or I guess the change in name in some industries of M&E, impact management and measurement. So in the sort of traditional world of doing M&E before, the assumption is that you'd be collecting a lot of data up until the point where either your donor or your board says that you need to do an external evaluation. So in other words, you've been diligently collecting information for about 3 to 5 years. And at that point, someone says, you know what, I wonder if this is making a difference or if this is impactful. And only at that point would an evaluation be conducted and the findings somehow feed back into making changes within an organization. I would say that the problem with that approach is that so many things happen within a year in terms of sort of cycles. You do strategy sessions, you do planning sessions, you do budgeting, and you know a lot of things need to change along the way. And waiting 5 years might be catastrophic because by then your donor may have pulled out or decided that it's changed its thematic area of focus. You might find that the results or the targets that you've been setting in terms of meeting those donor mandates might not be making sense anymore. In other words, you know, for example, a huge curveball was the pandemic in terms of in 2019, when you potentially have submitted a funding proposal and committed to a sort of reporting period, you might have estimated that you would have been able to do more than what you were able to do the following year in 2020 when the pandemic hit. So there are those instances where, you know, carrying out organizational operations that inform output or sort of activity level measures are not cast in stone. It's not always possible to, I guess, aim for more, do more, because the thing is in your operating environment change all the time. So therefore, you need to be more flexible in being able to, I guess, read the signs or understand the data to almost be intuitive around what that means in terms of your capacity to deliver on your mandate. Then evaluation is, I guess, linked to monitoring, but it's the process that happens as you gather data and you want to sort of be more systematic in your approach to understanding what it means. So it's a systematic and intentional process of gathering and analyzing data, both quantitative and quantitative, to inform learning, decision making, and action. So going back to what I was saying about IMM, the school of thought with IMM is that you actually evaluate as you monitor. So as you get data and you see things that are off course and off kilter, at that point you ask questions to say, is this right? Is this what we're wanting to achieve as an organization? Should we do something different? And then you make the decision. However, not to confuse you anymore about IMM versus M&E, the key point here is that if you're collecting information, if you're doing evaluation, you need to basically understand that in relation to your organizational cycle. And I guess M&E as a function historically has been seen as this sort of function that's separate to an organization. But the key point is that it's actually an integrated function of planning, resourcing, strategizing, and I guess budgeting as well. So I guess what's key is that M&E needs to be part of an integrated function within an organization, and it's supported by other roles within an organization. So I'm going to pause there for a moment. I know I've covered quite a lot of ground in about 20 minutes or so. Are there any questions or comments from the chat that need my attention before I move on to the forms of M&E?
This one, Askat, just sense check. Are we comfortable? Are you going to be sharing the presentation as well? Because I know we'll be sharing the recording. Are you comfortable with?
Yes, the presentation will be shared along with two extra resources. One is a survey called the Role Survey, which stands for Readiness for Organizational Learning and Evaluation. And I mean, before I go into the detail of the next slides, but it's a sort of good way to assess where you're at in terms of your organization's M&E. And the other one is a journal article on M&E capacity or evaluation capacity building. And again, another good way to check what level of M&E practice you've got within your organization. So Yes, the short answer is yes, I will be sharing the slides. And it'll be made available after the presentation. Any other questions?
Nothing on the chat at this moment.
Awesome. So just a question for people in the audience. The first one is, does your organization have an M&E function as a start? So I'll give you a minute or so, but Nolutando, if you can give me a sense check as to how many people are saying yes or no, or I'm unsure, that'd be great. So what's it looking like, Nolutando?
We currently have about 6 yeses, about 4 or 5 no's, and then there's in between yes and no.
Okay, so it's we know there's M&E, but we're not quite sure of the M&E, and some people are not aware if there's M&E.
Yes, and then there's some ad hoc as opposed to a defined role or structured unit.
Okay.
But there's more yeses than no's, yeah.
So the next question is, why does your organization have M&E?
This one response, donor requirement. Part of donor reporting to be a learning organization. To track program performance and measure our impact, to gain better clarity.
Okay.
Impact measurement, demonstrate impact on project activities, assess progress being made, and link to the objectives of the organization. More aligned, yeah.
Great. So those are all, I guess, linked to what I was about to say next is, so M&E forms part of a planning cycle. So like I said, traditionally there was this process called results-based monitoring, which is what you'd normally do is where you plan, you monitor, you evaluate. In a typical organizational cycle, ignoring that sort of longer term planning process, you would actually plan for the year ahead by looking at your calendar, sort of plotting out activities, and also looking at when your board reporting cycles are, as well as when you need to budget or resource for those to execute on that plan. Then maybe linked to that particular cycle is at a point of strategizing, you may want to almost test out a few concepts. So it can either be at the process of planning that you want to test out something before you go full scale with it, or as you do, you collect information. So um, sort of typical flows of M&E processes would actually form part of long-term planning, I guess, annual planning, and potentially planning or learning on the fly. So M&E, in terms of its role, can actually assist an organization at different stages of its planning process. So in simple terms, this is what it really is plan what you do what you've planned, assess if your plan is working out, make some changes, determine if you are effective in carrying out your plan, and then course correct if necessary. That's what all organizations do, and M&E data should be playing a role in this particular process. And I put a picture of Albert Einstein with the quote, "The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results." So M&E should allow you to do that sense check to say, well, we're not doing things right. We need to do something different. Things are not going our way, or things are going great, but we can do even greater work by doing X, Y, and Z. But then typically where things go wrong within an organizational cycle is that where you collect data throughout the year, but the data that comes through isn't necessarily shared organization-wide, and sort of the findings aren't necessarily fully understood. So what happens is you do 1, 2, 3, 5, or 1, 2, 3, 4 and a bit. In other words, you change something. In other words, you maybe budget a bit. I almost want to say you adjust your budget based on inflation, or you adjust your budget based on trying to do more, and then you determine by the end of the year if you were carrying out your plan as intended. But the main thing here is that sometimes that deep reflection pause moment is needed, and that's perhaps where your research and learning function of Mo starts to come in. So what are the implications for the sort of that red bit in terms of, not course correcting, using information and sharing, learning, is that it leads to resourcing risks within an organization as well as impact risks. And so those include not having the right number of people or staff complement. In other words, you fundraise and you try to do more than what you've done the previous year. Similarly, you might not have enough financial or resources. So in other words, because you're asking to do more and scale, inverted commas, scale your impact, um, it might not be enough to achieve what you're telling or committing to as an organization, or telling your donor. And that could also lead to overcommitting and burnout within an organization. From an impact point of view, you could have sort of staff impact, low staff morale, not fully understanding the needs of the participants, and then not necessarily being able to meet targets. So in simple terms, imagine a road trip where you ran out of mobile data, your GPS battery died, and you had no fuel. Um, it's going to be a very long and hard road trip to get to where you need to be. Those essential parts of, having the direction you need to achieve your goals, or to at least get to the destination, aren't in place. So before we go into the next bit, I'm keen to hear if has your organization experienced one of the risks mentioned here, or all of the above? What does it look like, Nolutando?
No responses yet, Oscar.
Okay. I think people are assessing whether or not they want to show their organization here or not, but it's fine. Um, and I guess maybe the other one is probably easier one to answer is, are M&E and research reports common knowledge in your organization? So in other words, do you get access to it? Is it free, readily available?
Got a couple of yeses coming in.
No, that's fantastic. And does your organization use M&E data in its planning processes?
Yeah, there's about 3 yeses, and then there's not as much as we could be.
Yeah, and that's also fine. I think in most organizations, that interplay between data usage and planning isn't always apparent. And I guess part of this presentation is also to show potentially how one might want to sort of give M&E data a sort of pronounced role. So this is an example of how the Alan Gray Orbis Foundation did its M&E when I was part of the organization. So we tried at the time to combine all those cycles that I mentioned, the results-based monitoring, the plan, do, check, act cycle, as well as the build, measure, learn. And we came up with something like this where, part of the philosophy was to plan what we do for the year, to collaborate and share with each other what we do, And then through our data analysis processes is to expose any insights that are useful and important for decision making or managing risk, to better understand the participants we work with by empathizing with them and using that to inform design decisions as well as data collection, to explore the data to understand what it means in context, and then to experiment with data to say what is, are we showing any impact, and then to actually catalog that data as evidence and to learn from those data points. So I guess this is a culmination of years of doing M&E, and I guess the growth of the impact assurance function within the Andre Orbis Foundation. But to get to this level of process needed a lot of teething. So I'd say that initially it was really around plan, provide evidence, and learn. Collaboration happened along the way, but maybe not as systematic. But right now it's a sort of a process where the department is resourced, there's a budget, and it follows this sort of synchronous cycle of collaborating, sharing information, and looking at data differently, and even exploring what that data means by doing research as well. So in an ideal world, this is kind of what you want to be getting to, is to have a process that is intuitive, and allows for strategic decision making, and the organization to to understand its relevance in the problem that it's trying to solve. Here's a sort of a bold vision approach to M&E, which is to assess, design, monitor, evaluate, reflect, and transition or redesign, similar to this process, but taking a more long-term approach. So you get different functions of M&E, and this is now going back to the crux of what does one want to think about when you set up M&E? The purpose of M&E, and where it's situated in within an organization. You have M&E functions being called MEAL, which stands for Monitoring, Evaluation, Accountability, and Learning. You have M&E functions called MERL, which is essentially what I'm talking about today, is Monitoring, Evaluation, Research, and Learning. MEO, which is Monitoring, Evaluation, and Operations. PMEAL, which is Planning, Monitoring, Evaluation, Accountability, and Learning. MER, M&E and Reporting, and IM, as I alluded to earlier. You also find that there are some new roles linked to M&E now, where knowledge management, business intelligence, data viz, data science, business analysis, all of these things start to become part of what M&E does, as well as M&E forming part of designing program interventions, as well as almost M&E people or functions of M&E for focusing on behavioral change specifically, and more in the sort of impact investing space, M&E function linking more to verifying whether or not there's impact. So in other words, quality checking the data, and doing some form of audit to make sure that the change that you've wanted to affect has actually occurred within the intended participants or community that you're hoping to bring about change in. So this sort of takes me to the next segment of my presentation, is basically what could you do better to support M&E in your organization. So before I go on into this section, I'm keen to hear, are there any sort of other further inputs to what I've mentioned within my presentation so far? Any reflections or aha moments? Nolutando, are they?
There's one comment here, Oscar. How does one speak to the importance of this work for any or every organization?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess this leads to the next topic. So I guess what's important is that within any organization, I guess, in a for-profit environment, the key currency or unit of, I guess, common understanding is profit and growth. In the sort of non-profit sector, the unit of currency, or talking about the common understanding is how do we make more, should be how we make more impact, along with um, how do we sustain ourselves. So I guess the way to make it sort of key to an organization is to use the findings to sort of talk in terms of how do we best serve those who we intended to serve, and what does the data tell us? But also in terms of what we're trying to achieve, what is the data telling us about the way we resource things? So, I would almost say that M&E plays a sort of role across different job types within organizations. So, for example, your finance team or department within an organization would ask very different questions about M&E. It would be about merit or worth. Or, it's costing us too much to run this activity, so we can't ask more for in terms of budget, or does it have to be this way? So even though the question is framed in a finance way, it does have a link back to M&E around implementation models, and how best does one achieve the same impact with less, or how do we budget more to have more resources to achieve greater impact. So it's really to not consider M&E or the data separate to what you do. So to this particular slide is ask questions about recent reports. What is the data saying? What does it mean for me in terms of your role? And what does it mean for the participants or communities we're trying to serve? And what does it mean in context? This little cartoon here says how we didn't really collect any data on how our participants' lives were changed, but we have loads of data about all the cool stuff we've done. So this sort of speaks to the point around we collect a lot of information, but is it telling us the right things about um, how we are making a difference in the sort of lives and context we're operating in? Then is to include M&E as part of your planning process. So consider the risks that I mentioned above in terms of resourcing risks and impact risks. And I think this is where one might want to start thinking about how you bring M&E teams and M&E functions into some of the discussions you have in terms of team meetings, whether or not you're in the planning function, the HR function, marketing function, fundraising, um, or even sort of program implementation. There's some form of cross-cutting data that M&E functions might be sitting on that you might find important, and vice versa. There's some insight you might have around where the organization's going that would be very useful for an M&E person to know as they produce these reports and sort of make sense of it for you. Uh, I would say key is also to think of M&E as part of your strategy. How does it tell you that you're sort of on the right track? And these sort of two diagrams below, two cartoons below, are really showing you, it's one actually comes from a cartoon on theory of change, is that trying to address a problem, you might think of all the complicated ways to achieve impact, but sometimes it's about questioning that logic as to, is it the right thing that we're doing to achieve the impact? And then the second cartoon is showing you, um, sort of ignoring monitoring data when you're sort of going off the edge of a cliff. Is that one needs to look at that data in relation to your plan, your strategic plan, and whether or not you're on track to achieve what you want for the year, or in general, in terms of, are you on course to achieve the impact that you want? So having that lens to ask yourself about the validity of what you do and whether or not you're on track with your achieving your organizational vision, which again, it's related to M&E, but would probably sit more with the sort of exco type roles within an organization, even the sort of management of programs as well, as they face different questions from boards and so on. So I would say key here is that you consider M&E as part of your strategy in terms of what it's able to tell you about the direction you're taking. The other thing that's important is to resource the M&E function. In other words, what I mean here is that a lot of the time when organizations start out, with M&E, it's seen as a person's job, which is true. There is usually an M&E officer, specialist, or administrator, coordinator doing some M&E, but it's actually an integrated function that cross-cuts across many roles within an organization. So like I mentioned, your program teams might be collecting records about participants. Your marketing fundraising team might be wanting to share impact stories about how the interventions you've been creating have made a difference. Your HR person might be wanting to hire people that fit the bill in terms of the mandate that you have. There's usually a certain I almost want to say profile of hire that you're looking for, and if they've got the right focus and I guess attention and desire to make an impact, having some of that M&E data would help hire the right people, but also potentially motivate staff within the organization, knowing that the work they've done is meaningful and have made a difference in the lives of the people and communities you're trying to serve.
Are you listening to one? Oscar, there's a question here
Yes.
from Emmy. It says, rather than simply collecting lots of data, how do you decide which core data points should or could provide the most indicative data? This is which tool question, I guess.
Yeah, so I'd say that you would want to start off by looking at your theory of change, and looking at those outcomes that relate to the impact that you're trying to create. So I would say it's about trying to do two things: is to know how do you collect data that show the sequence of outcomes leading to the impact you're trying to do, and how do you collect data around the activities that relate to what you're trying to do. And in that way, almost say like some outcomes will only happen in 5 years' time. So to maybe time your data collection in such a way that you don't collect too much over time so that your system doesn't become overburdened. But know that, for example, by this I mean you have a cohort that's starting a program in a particular year, right? And your program is about 5 years long. So there's some data you want to collect in year 1 and in year 5 and potentially in year 3, because that gives you enough, I guess, data points to assess change from 1 to year 3 and year 3 to year 5. And potentially you'd want to evaluate the effectiveness of that impact or that intervention after year 5. And if you are using IMM as your approach in terms of M&E, understand what's the difference that the program creates between year 3 and year 1, year 5 and year 3, to then start, I guess, digging deep. So in other words, you set yourself milestones of data collection, and that part of what you do is rather explore what's already in existence to maybe better understand rather than collecting everything. And I guess a good guide to that is to use your theory of change and the assumptions that are related to it to guide what you collect. Um, and then also to know that at certain points, some of the data you may be interested in may be best collected in a formal evaluation rather than as you go along, because that might create this sort of, I wouldn't say analysis paralysis, but like over collecting data where you've got reams of data that nobody's making sense of. So it really needs to link back to how does your organization make decisions? What's the implication of or going back to what I was mentioning, the risk of not having that right information to make that decision or iteration, and is it telling us that we're on the right track? So going back to the compass of your strategy and vision and theory of change is just to make sure that what you have at your disposal in terms of information is able to guide that and your planning processes. So, I mean, I can't really say you need 5 indicators or 2 indicators or 1 indicator. It depends on what your organization is trying to achieve. But I think the key thing here is to make sure that you have what you need to have at your disposal to guide your organization's operations and strategy planning cycle. And that will usually, I guess, be a collective effort by, and maybe links back to my point around integrated function, for other functions within an organization to somehow feedback what they need in order to drive um, operational and strategic processes forward. Obviously, there's a limit to the M&E department or person's capacity, but the key thing is that it needs to also inform other functions within an organization.
And then there's
Sorry.
another question as a follow-up to that. Scott says, what about log frames? Is that not the best way of how to use M&E and tracking if you have made progress?
Yes, the log frame is one of the tools to do so. So a log frame is really a version of a logic model that unpacks the indicators and time frame that you want to be collecting information against. So in simple terms, it's a project plan for M&E, and a way to sort of categorize and define the measures that you're trying to collect information for. So I think one of the last slides I have in terms of future topics is how does one go about building that M&E framework or sort of log frame of tracking measures. So yes, it's a good way to do that. But prior to building a log frame, you would need to almost want to say distinguish what the organizational priorities are in terms of data collection, in terms of trying to achieve your impact, as well as to inform your general operational cycle as well. Because sometimes the log frame, what it does, it almost gets you to focus on outcomes, outputs, and activities along the way, and it becomes almost like a static document of just talking about what you've done for the year rather than digging deep and saying, well, what we've done effective? Is what we've done the right thing? And what does it mean in terms of where we're going? So a log frame is useful, but I would say to maybe not let it only sit and be the M&E person's or function's job to update. Everyone should be looking at that and saying, how does it relate back to what we do as an organization? I don't know if there's another question in relation to that, or but
Yeah, all
it
good.
does relate to my next point around sharing your learning. So you might find something in relation to the log frame. It might trigger a thought as to, we're finding that participants are dropping out as an example. Why is that the case? Or that you do find out that they're dropping out because of maybe the scheduling of the program activities are on a weekend, and that's when they have to do part-time work, or that's when they need to spend time with their family, and therefore having activities on a weekend is not ideal. So even though it might seem like a mundane thing, for the M&E person to know, those are some of those subtle things that form, for example, in this case, an indicator on retention or dropout, would help better contextualize what they communicate in M&E reports and potentially to reports that go to the funder. Also, I would say that it would be good to also co-create sort of M&E reports with the M&E team. So perhaps once the report is produced, is to give comments on it, to say, these results are as because of X, Y, and Z. And in that way, you'd have a lot of richness in terms of being able to add meaning to those reports, and also making sense of data as a collective within an organization. So I'll pause there because I'm sort of heading towards the end part of my presentation. I know I've covered quite a lot of ground, and I hope I haven't run away from you as a group. But I just want to check if there are any further questions or comments that may have surfaced as I was talking.
You can go ahead, Emmy.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to check if you're running a professional development program for a closed membership and you're wanting to make sure that you're giving them value. So beyond the fact that it's a discounted program that we run for them, we do surveys based on a case-by-case basis for attendees of workshops. But so we have a survey for every attendee who's attended every workshop we run. But if I'm wanting to generate a report that would actually show the level of customer satisfaction for this service, or where there might be gaps in what we're offering. I guess I'm asking, how do I make sense of all the survey data, and is that perhaps not a better way to do this than just individual attendee surveys?
Yeah, I'd say that it's you could say in session feedback. So, sometimes you take for granted that in sessions you might find some participants, giving feedback as to what they want in terms of professional development, or you might find in conversation. So I would say things like focus groups, or even on your website, stuff like website preferences as well. So When someone logs on, or if someone subscribes to a particular professional development series, they might check box what they're interested in. So it may be just a case of nuancing those surveys or looking at other points of where data is produced. So like I mentioned, websites, social media, or even within sessions to say, with a particular cohort of people, this is what they're asking for, this is what it represents, or on the sort of website information, this is what the sign-in information looks like. So in that way, you can start to nuance your data a bit more, and maybe just send out surveys twice a year, at the start or at the end, or in the middle and at the end, so that you use the data in a cyclical way to inform, I guess, changes that happen on the fly. Because otherwise, you might be in a situation where you're collecting all the time and you get survey fatigue.
Thank you very much. We do an annual survey, and we have also broken that down into a regional survey because we find different regions have different needs and interests. But thank you. It's good to know that we're doing some of the stuff right. Thank you so much.
Are there any other questions, Nolitano?
None at the moment, Oscar.
Okay. So, I mean, this basically says is a slide that talks about how one might want to consider future topics, maybe for this group. This is actually coming from a series that I was facilitating with the Bridge Education Community of Practice on M&E. The one on the left, the bullet points reflect what the audience wanted at that time, was really around, what is your M&E capacity as an organization? What are you doing to build capacity? Demystifying M&E through understanding terminology, evaluative thinking, theory of change, and so on. And then on the right-hand side, this cartoon also shows, and it comes from an actual M&E framework guide, what some of those things you might want to have in place as you start your M&E capacity building, in going back to what I was mentioning around the scope of M&E and the log frame. So in other words, that early question around log frame is that preceding the actual tool of a log frame, one wants to start with scoping what do you want to go into that measurement approach for an organization? What is your theory of change? What are those strategic and evaluation questions you want to ask yourself if you are on the right track? And then to have a plan, I want to call it project plan or a resource plan as to when and how you collect data. And I think as important is how you disseminate that information and share that information, because often, sending an email with a report is one thing, but sitting down with the team, going through the data, letting them ask questions, or even sharing it with the participants who you've collected information about, will give you a lot of good insights as to what that data means, rather than just reporting what came out of the data collection process. And that allows for sort of that continuous learning cycle. And then what I've included as part of my presentation are just some resources you may want to consider. So the American Evaluation Association has a blog that it regularly updates on, some tools and tips as to how to better do M&E or evaluations. Better evaluation as well, which is also like a Wikipedia, if you want to call it like that, for M&E people. I'll be attaching a sort of journal article on understanding M&E capacity, as well as a guide for setting up an M&E framework. Then there's sort of links to the Mole Center and measure evaluation, and South African M&E Association, which I'm part of, and it'd be great if you joined, because we always have webinars throughout the year. We've also this year trying to launch more communities of practice events that are linked to thematic areas. Just to name a few, there's one on just transition, one on adaptive management, MILTech, so M&E and technology. And I'm looking to launch one on impact investing as well. And then every 2 years, we host an annual conference. And at those conferences and in between those conference years, we also run, or at least our members who are capacity training or capacity building and training providers provide discounted training to those who are members. So those are just a few resources for assessing your organization's capacity and potentially accessing resources to build your own capacity. And then there are also some free courses, some great ones actually from the Philanthropy University. So please check it out. Acumen Plus as well has some free courses. edX as well, if you search for impact evaluation. Coursera as well, if you search for impact evaluation or impact management and measurement. And then if you want to follow the formal degree process, WITS, UCT, and Stellenbosch University all have M&E courses in place that some of them are short courses and some of them are diplomas and full-on degrees. But it'll be worthwhile if you're interested in following this particular career path to check them out as well. But if you just want some basic skills and want to be able to converse with your M&E teams, I would say that the philanthropy university ones are pretty good. Even though I've been through the formal M&E course myself with UCT, doing some of the philanthropy and Acumen Plus courses have been quite a big eye-opener for me as well, and to some extent has even changed my perception of how to make M&E more practical. So that's really it from my side. I'll end off there and sort of open the floor to any questions. Sorry, before I end off, I did have like some bonus slides, but this is just in your own time if you're keen. Some other tools you might want to use, things like value proposition. Even though it's not an M&E tool, it's a good tool for understanding the needs of your participants. Customer journey mapping, again, not an M&E tool, but good for understanding what your participants go through as you collect data. And then the business model canvas, which is around how you set up your organization. And, where it links back to M&E is, I also want to say, using the M&E data to make sense of these things. And why I've included it as part of the slide deck is to basically say that all these tools that sit outside of M&E, like value proposition, business model canvas, and customer journey maps, are maybe not foreign to program design teams, but if you link that back to M&E data that you may have, it might help with making changes within an organization in terms of, maybe introduction of a new functions, departments, or programs, and also to better understand user needs, program participant needs as you design. So those are just included, just in case you are keen on taking some of this information a bit further. So I'll end off there. Keen to take any questions or comments.
There is a question here asked, do any entities offer M&E as an outsourced function, or persons willing to engage with an organization regularly to do the M&E as a regular input, and do you consult on M&E?
Yeah, so there are, I would almost say that there are organizations that do that. But I think in the South African context, outsourcing M&E is not that common from what I know. But it is possible if you engage. I know on our SAMEA member list, there are lots of consulting companies that have signed up as members. And then the one on, do I consult on this? Yes, I do consulting. I do assist organizations with establishing their theories, or building up their logic models, or theories of change, setting up M&E frameworks and data collection, and conducting evaluations, or even commissioning evaluations. So that along with training as well. Okay, I don't know if there are any other comments. So awesome, thanks for that thumbs up. So there's the role survey, which will attach with this, is basically a survey that is a self-assessment. Nobody sees your data except you, but it's good to go through with someone, with your M&E team, or the sort of leaders in charge of your organization, because that will help. I also want to say assess what is missing from your M&E function to make sure that those data points that you collect somehow feedback to your planning processes, and potentially to your participants as well. Because I do think a trick that's always missed is that the participants are the ones where we're collecting information from, but they're not quite sure what that information means for them and why the information is being collected from them. So I guess it's a bit of a nuance as to not telling them too much about what the data means, because the organization still needs to make sense of it. But I think feeding back some information as to where the data went and potentially how it's led to changes is important for building that long-term buy-in for data collection. Sure. You can actually, so I've got included my LinkedIn profile here, but if you want, I can share it with you offline as well. Okay, that's it from my side. I know I've given you back half an hour of your life. I don't know if it's a good or bad thing. And I've went through the presentation quite quick. So you will be able to access or be shared, given this presentation, as well as the resources I've mentioned. Over to you, Giles.
Thanks, Asgar. Are there any other questions? I think let's open it up a little bit. We do have time. Is anyone sitting with a question they'd like to test Asgar on, or just get some input on? Just pop it on the chat. But also okay if there aren't any. I see. I think it's Penelope from NASCEE's just put up just a feedback form from NASCEE. Would be great if you guys could just complete that now before you log out. But if there are no more questions from a NASCEE perspective, just a big thank you, Asgar. And I don't think I mentioned it clearly enough in my intro, but this has really been a partnership between NASCEE and SAMEA. We both associations that represent the development sector, and NASCEE's members are all either NGOs or social enterprises, and it's just great to have such a good relationship with SAMEA. M&E's is a backbone for all of us, and some of us know it better than others. So it's just really useful to get some insight from you around some of the key trends, key things that we need to think about. So a big thank you to SAMEA for having a partnership with NASCEE, and Asgar, for you for making your time available to share your insights and your speciality with us. So yeah, big thank you. Thanks so much.
No problem.
Nolutando, anything from the Data Innovators group who also hold, in this partnership with NASCEE, that any questions you think would be useful at this point?
Good at this point, but I was planning to reach out to Bridget in particular with regards to the M&E advisory support question, just to indicate that that is something that Data Innovators do offer to clients as well.
Yeah, I like what Asgar said around the SAMEA list. If you go onto SAMEA, there's probably a list of a number of consulting companies there, and obviously the Data Innovators group who are a direct partner with NASCEE on this. So yeah, it's a sales opportunity for us all. Great. Well, if there are no more questions, yeah, again, thank you so much. Thank you to all the participants. Thank you to Lungi and Sandy and Penelope from the NASCEE team, and for Nolutando and Jerusha and others from the Data Innovators group for making this session possible. M&E is, yeah, it's something that we all deal with and can't escape. It's part of every funding proposal that we write. It's part of our day-to-day. It's part of how we manage our people and make sure that we can tell a strong story about impact. So, Asgar, thank you very much. And guys, please look out for the dates and times for the next session. Do we have those, Nolutando, already for the next one, or have we not confirmed the date and time for that?
We have confirmed them with Sandy already, and Penelope has just posted for the next one, which will be focusing on developing a reporting framework, which is happening on the 23rd of March. So it's still this month. And then be on the lookout then on the NASCEE social media page for the remaining, so that we have a sense of when the remaining sessions are happening.
Okay, so the next one is on the 23rd of March, and it's about, just say that again.
Developing a reporting framework.
Developing a reporting framework. Okay, so just deepening on the work that the session that Asgar's just done. Great, guys. So yeah, please sign up for that, and look forward to seeing you there. Asgar, thanks again, and have a great Tuesday, everyone.
Thanks so much. Keep well, everyone.
Thank you.
And we will share this presentation. It's been recorded, so you'll all get it. And then Asgar, you'll speak to Sandy about sending the actual presentation, or how are we doing that? Well, we can figure that out.
Yeah, I'll send it to you now actually, and then you can share it with me.
Okay, cool.
Awesome.
Thanks,
you.
guys.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, Asgard, thanks so much for the time and effort you put into this. Really appreciate it.
No problem. It's always good to chat with the audience. I think it's always good to chat to non-M&E people as well, because I think often we get caught in our own jargon,
Yeah, of course.
and it's very difficult to sometimes translate that information. So I think it's always good to hear from others who may be interested in M&E, what their experiences are.
Absolutely. And I'm thinking when you guys run webinars through SAMEA, we must just link in our databases so that we get value for that. Like, well, not, I suppose it's for your members only, but I think we need to try and get more of our members to be your members, because I'm sure there's lots of overlap. You know, so it's a way that we can push the partnerships more strongly.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, maybe that's something we actually need to just think about in terms of planning.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it'll be good to have like a joint sort of planning session with.
Yeah, let me. Who would be the right person at SAMEA to speak to set that up?
It would be Marla. She's the coordinator or administrator of SAMEA. So I think it's
Could you link me with her on email?
yes, I can do that.
That'd be great. If you got it's giles@newleaders.co.za.
Yeah.
Because I think that would be a great start, because then at least we can start putting something more formalized in place.
Yep. Awesome.
Yeah. Anything else, guys, for this? I see there's still quite a few people on here. How many? Or is it just the team? No. There's quite a few people still in the meeting. Okay, cool. I'm going to sign off. Nolutanda, you happy? Anything you want to just check? Okay, nothing. Hopefully people have completed the feedback form, because that's part of our M&E. Thanks, guys. Go well. Ciao.